Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to day 27 of the Ramadan Dua Accelerator with only 2, possibly 3 days left of the series. I really hope that you guys have been enjoying it, and I hope that the ending of your Ramadan has been going well. Today's dua is found in Surah Yusuf, and we will jump right into the verse that we are talking about. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال رب السجن أحب إلي مما يدعونني إليه وإلا تصرف عني كيدهن أصب إليهن وأكون من الجاهلين. Yusuf prayed, "My Lord, I would rather be in jail than do what they invite me to, and if you do not turn their cunning away from me, I might yield to them and fall into ignorance." Let's jump into the details of the story. And some of you guys might hear this and be like, well, this isn't a dua. He's not asking anything, but it is a dua. And there are two ways that we know it's a dua. First and foremost, the fact that he's even calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But also the second reason that we know that this is a dua is because the verse right after it follows the same exact sequence that we see other verses of du'as of prophets follows, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about how he responded to this dua, how he responded to Yusuf. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, صَرَفَ عَنْهُ كَيْدُهُنَّ إِنَّهُ هُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. His Lord responded to him, turning their cunning away from him. Surely he is the all-hearing, all-knowing. So what is this all about, and what can we learn from this specific dua? Yusuf's story is considered the best story to ever be narrated in the Quran. It is the best story because of the details, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constructs the story, and it is delivered in a single surah, Surah Yusuf, from beginning to end. With that being said, part of the story of Yusuf alayhi salam is he is tested with trial after trial after trial, without the wisdom of those trials being revealed until the very end of the story. And so Yusuf alayhi salam finds himself in a situation where, after being sold into slavery, is one of the minister's servants, or living with the minister of the time, a very well-known and influential person in the region. And it is that minister's wife who attempts to seduce Yusuf alayhi salam to try to trick him and forcibly make him sleep with her because she found him so attractive. And so when it was found out that by the rest of the noblewomen that this woman attempted to make her servant sleep with her, obviously the idea in the minds of this woman is she was trying to sleep with someone who was of low status. What kind of a noble woman does that? And so she gathers them and collects them, brings them over to her place where they are. They're all given fruit to cut, essentially, and she sends Yusuf alayhi salam into the room. And they're all struck by how absolutely stunning this man is, and completely lose their senses. And in response to that, she says, "See, this is the guy who made me do it." And now they all can understand why this noble woman would want to seduce a man who is of lesser nobility than her. And this woman basically says in front of all these other women that this is the one who you guys were mocking me about. And now she's saying in front of all these women, if he does not do what I'm telling him to do, i.e. if he does not sleep with me, I am going to throw him into prison. You can imagine, first of all, how bold of a person you have to be to essentially insinuate that you are going to forcibly require someone to do that act with you. And upon hearing that, scholars of the Quran say that actually the women that were in the room supported her in this. And Yusuf alayhi salam then responds to their support in this whole situation with this statement, which is, "My Lord," meaning it translates here to "I would rather be in jail," but rather it actually is, the translation is better translated as jail is more precious to me. Like, jail is more desirable to me than to do what they invite me to. And if you do not turn their cunning away from me, I might yield to them and fall into ignorance. We know that he's specifically responding not just to this woman, the minister's wife, but also to the group of women who are trying to encourage her in this sin and trying to harm Yusuf alayhi salam in this way. And what's really profound about this dua, a few different things, right? Living in a world that, in the modern world that we live in, where we see this in the Western world, but it's slowly leaking its way into the Eastern side of the world as well, is a place where there is no such thing as chastity. If you're someone who reserves themselves for marriage, then you're seen as uptight, you're seen as a loser, you're seen as restricting yourself as archaic and conservative and traditional and to look down upon. And that very thing that is being looked down upon, Yusuf alayhi salam understands how significantly important it is, to the point that he's willing to risk his own life, i.e. to be in jail for the entirety of his life than to step into the sin. That is how essential chastity is in our religion, and it's something that we throw out so quickly. I mean, hookup culture, especially in the United States, is something that is so all-consuming. You find it in every corner of this country, and nobody questions it. Despite the harms, both the biological harms in terms of unwanted pregnancies, STDs, and so on, but also the psychological harms that come from it, the spiritual harms that come from it. And so if we ever wonder how significant of an issue this is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, see how his prophet responds to us. That's point one. Point two is the fact that Yusuf alayhi salam says something very interesting. He's a prophet and he's saying this, so I want you to take note, right? If you do not turn their cunning away from me, I might yield to them and fall into ignorance. So we tend to have this idea that people of virtue, like people of high virtue, were very religious. They just don't have the desires. They manage to master their tarbiyah and tazkiyah so well that they just don't even feel the desire towards these sins. And the reality is, no, people are human beings. Human beings have desire. Rather, what Yusuf did here and what people of virtue do is that they learn how to tame their desire. They learn how to discipline their desire, but they also recognize that what their weaknesses are. And Yusuf alayhi salam, being a young man who had never been married, having this beautiful woman who is of high status literally throwing herself at him, knows that this is a very, very slippery slope. And the Quran says, "La taqrabu zina," don't even come near zina. So he's realizing this is in front of me. This is one of the strongest biological drives that any person has. But specifically when we talk about this biological drive, testosterone is a huge driver of that drive. And with men having obviously up to 20 times or more testosterone than a woman, then temptation can hit them even harder. And that's just a biological fact. It's just the nature of the hormones that exist. If you speak to 10 married women, 9 times out of 10, they will tell you the same thing, which is that their husband's drive is much more relentless and stronger than their drives. To recognize your faults, to recognize your weakness is not a bad thing, because we're human beings and we have limitations. And it's in those areas where we find ourselves most capable of falling to sin, because it connects to a deep desire of ours that we really need to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bolster and protect. We shouldn't think of it like this. If you have something you think about, you want to identify those weak points, and then obviously do what you can to limit your access to them, but also think about how, remind yourself that you need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help you, and that little gap is still there because you're a human being, and that whatever that desire is for you, the opening is still there. You have to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help plug that opening so you do not fall into it and end up from the ignorant. Ultimately, what do we learn from this dua? First and foremost, recognize that we're human beings with limitations. We all have that one thing, that guilty pleasure, whatever it is, that we are most likely to fall into. And we should be asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from that, and for him to allow his strength and his mercy and his protection to fill the gaps that are left by our weakness. And number 2 is to recognize that there are certain virtues of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we shouldn't overlook, we shouldn't underplay. Even if we live in a society that normalizes the sin around it, recognize that some things are just so incredibly damaging to the soul of a human being, so damaging to your akhirah, that to even come near it is playing with fire, both metaphorically and literally, because it could result in your entry into Jahannam. And obviously we are trying to protect ourselves from that. With that being said, you guys, I hope this was a helpful video for you, and assalamu alaikum. I will see you in the next one. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already.